I raised her with love. I tucked her in at night, wiped her tears when she was scared, braided her hair before school. Um, I knew she wasn't mine by blood, but in every way that counted, she was my daughter. And for 12 years, that was enough. Until one day, I wasn't enough anymore. Mom said you never wanted me here. That sentence shattered something inside me. Madison, my stepdaughter, looked at me with eyes full of cold certainty, not the warmth I had grown used to. My stomach dropped. What did she mean? What mom? The one who walked out on her when she was barely 3? The one who hadn't called in a decade? Who sent birthday cards late or never at all? My name is Elena, and this is how I lost the girl I called my daughter. Not to an accident, not to fate, but to lies. Lies told by the woman who left, returned, and poisoned everything I had built with love. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply stood there with her words echoing in my ears, wondering when love stopped being enough. Before I met Elena, my life was simple. I was a junior marketing manager working long hours, living alone, and occasionally dating without commitment. Then I met Mark. He was calm, kind, and different from anyone I'd known. He was also a widower with a quiet, observant 3-year-old daughter named Madison. Madison didn't talk much when I first met her. She clung to her stuffed bear and looked at everyone with wary eyes. Mark told me her mother had left when Madison was barely 2. There was no dramatic tragedy, no heroic death, just abandonment. One morning, she was gone, left a note, some money, and vanished. Didn't plan on becoming a mother. But life doesn't ask for plans. Mark and I grew close fast. He made me laugh in ways I forgot I could, and he looked at me like I was the first sunlight after a storm. We married quietly in the fall. Madison wore a tiny cream dress and held my hand so tightly during the ceremony that I had a bruise the next day. The beginning wasn't perfect. Madison would cry at night, call for a woman who never returned her calls, and sometimes look at me like I was an intruder. But slowly, walls came down. I read bedtime stories, made heart-shaped pancakes, learned the names of every stuffed animal she owned. When she got the flu, I stayed up all night with her. When she lost her first tooth, she handed it to me, not Mark. "Do you love me even though I'm not your real daughter?" she asked once. I cried. I held her and told her yes, 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 1,000 times yes. Being your mom is the realest thing I've ever done. Mark was supportive, though distant at times. He worked long hours as an engineer and left most of the parenting to me. I never resented it. I was proud of our little home, our weird traditions, our Sunday movie nights. Madison blossomed, smart, creative, funny. She once told her second-grade teacher she wanted to be a mom like Elena when she grew up. I thought we were solid, more than solid. We were good. When Madison had nightmares, she'd crawl into my bed. When she had her first crush, I was the one she whispered it to. We painted her room blue when she turned 10 because she said pink was for babies. She grew taller, sharper, more confident, and I beamed at every step. I never tried to replace her mother. That woman was a ghost. And I figured Madison had buried that part of her heart a long time ago. But what I didn't realize was how deeply children crave answers to their origin stories, even ones written in pain. I don't know exactly when it started to shift. Maybe around middle school. Madison asked questions, small ones at first. Did my real mom like dogs? Why did she leave? What was her name again? I answered honestly, but gently. She left when you were very small, sweetie. I don't know much else. She nodded, usually satisfied, until she wasn't. One day she found an old photo in a dusty box in the garage, a woman with dark curls and Madison's same eyes. She's pretty, Madison said quietly. She looks like me. I felt a chill, but I smiled. She does. But beauty isn't everything. Um, I didn't think much of it. I should have. I should have known that one photograph could plant seeds. But at the time, all I saw was my daughter, the girl who chose to call me mom, who gave me macaroni necklaces and whispered, I love you before sleep. I held onto that image, blind to the undercurrents beginning to shift beneath the surface. When Madison turned 12, she made me a birthday card that read, Thank you for loving me, even though you didn't have to. I cried in the kitchen, card clutched to my chest, overwhelmed with a sense of purpose. That night, Mark kissed my forehead and said, You've given her something I never could, security. I never questioned my place in her life after that. I was mom, maybe not in birth certificate ink, but in scraped knees and holiday cookies, in handmade gifts and whispered secrets. I built my life around her. Every major choice, job changes, where we lived, how we spent money, always factored Madison in. There were moments I'd catch myself staring at her, wondering what her birth mother might think if she saw her now. Would she feel regret? Would she want to come back? But those were fleeting worries. Madison was mine. So when the foundation began to crack, I didn't notice the first fractures. I didn't see the signs that something or someone was slowly undoing everything I had worked so hard to build. It started subtly, little things that I could have ignored if I hadn't known her so well. Madison began spending more time in her room, less time at her dinner table. When I'd ask about her day, she'd shrug or mutter a monosyllable. Um, the vibrant girl who once couldn't stop talking about her science projects now barely looked up from her phone. Teenage phase, Mark said. Let her be. And I tried. God, I tried. I left notes in her lunchbox, made her favorite meals, bought her that blue hoodie she'd been eyeing online. She smiled politely, thanked me, but it didn't feel real. Something was off. One evening, I passed by her room and heard whispers. She was on the phone, her voice low and urgent. When I knocked, the conversation ended abruptly. Who were you talking to? I asked gently. Just a friend, she replied, not meeting my eyes. Another day, I found a crumpled envelope in the trash addressed to Madison. The return address wasn't familiar. The handwriting was loopy, overly affectionate. My sweet girl, I miss you every day. I didn't recognize the name signed at the bottom, but I had a gut feeling. Is there something you want to talk about? I asked her that evening, trying to keep my tone neutral. No, she said flatly. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too strict. Maybe I didn't listen enough. I went over every interaction, every argument, every joke that might have been misunderstood. I asked Mark for help, but he brushed it off. Stop overanalyzing. She's fine. But I wasn't. I felt like I was losing her. Then came the comments. I bet my real mom would let me go to that concert. My real mom wouldn't embarrass me in front of my friends. I froze each time, not because she used the phrase real mom, but because of the way she said it. Like a weapon. Mark stayed silent through most of it. He didn't correct her, didn't stand up for me. That silence began to echo louder than her words. At school events, Madison would walk ahead, not beside me. Her teachers still greeted me warmly. Alina, you must be so proud. But Madison would roll her eyes. I felt like a stranger tagging along. One day, I overheard her talking to a friend on FaceTime. She's not even my real mom. She just acts like she owns me. The words hit harder than I expected. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried quietly. I didn't understand. What had changed? I had loved her the same every day, maybe too much. Maybe that was the problem. I began noticing the lies. She said you grounded her last weekend, Mark mentioned casually. What? No, she went to her friend's birthday. Or she said you don't let her call her mom. They'd never said that. Never. The more I tried to connect, the more she recoiled. She kept secrets. She changed her passwords. She looked at me with suspicion like I was hiding something. It wasn't just a phase. It was personal. It was calculated. And somewhere in the middle of that growing distance, I started feeling afraid, not of her, but of what she was becoming. I told myself, you've loved her through worse. She's just confused. You'll get her back. But deep down, a quieter voice whispered, she's slipping away, and someone's pulling her. Then one night, I found her crying in the backyard. I rushed to her side, heart racing. Madison, what's wrong? She pulled away from me. Don't pretend you care. The words sliced deeper than I could show. Of course I care. Why would you think I don't? She wiped her eyes and mumbled, she told me you hated me from the beginning, that you only raised me to make Dad happy. Huh, who? I asked, though I already knew. My mom. It was the first time she acknowledged having contact with her birth mother. I was stunned, not because the woman had reappeared, but because Madison had kept it from me and believed her. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I watched my stepdaughter, my daughter, walk back into the house, shoulders stiff with blame and confusion. And I stood there in the cold night, realizing for the first time that love, no matter how pure, could be rewritten by lies. The betrayal didn't come in one explosion. It came like a slow leak, drip by drip, until I was drowning before I even realized I was sinking. It was a Wednesday. Rain tapped gently on the windows. I had made spaghetti, Madison's favorite, and set the table early. I even lit candles, thinking maybe we could talk, just the two of us. Maybe we could fix whatever invisible thread had snapped between us. She came home late. Her hair was damp from the rain, her jacket unzipped. She looked at the table, then at me, with an expression I couldn't read. Can we talk? I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked upstairs. An hour later, Mark came into the kitchen. His face was tight, unreadable. Elena, he said, we need to talk. I knew instantly it wasn't about dinner. He told me Madison had said I was emotionally abusive, that I manipulated her, guilted her into affection, tried to isolate her from her birth mother. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. You can't be serious, I whispered. She has proof, he said. What proof? She saved text messages, notes, journal entries. I stared at him. My mouth was dry. You mean she's been documenting me? He didn't answer. What do you believe? I asked quietly. He hesitated. That hesitation broke me. Madison emerged from the hallway, arms crossed. I'm going to stay with Mom for a while. Madison, I said, stepping toward her. Please, don't do this. I don't know what she told you, but she told me the truth, she snapped. You were always jealous of her. You treated me like a doll you could control. That's not true, I said, shaking my head. I raised you. I loved you. You don't get to claim that, she screamed. You're not even my mom. Silence. Mark didn't speak. He didn't move. Something in me cracked. So that's it, I said. You're kicking me out? She needs space, Mark muttered. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while. We packed in silence. Just two bags. I didn't cry, not yet. I moved like a ghost, like someone watching her own life crumble from outside her body. As I reached the front door, Madison stood at the top of the stairs. You're not the victim here. she said coldly. And I knew then that I had lost her. I slept on a friend's couch that night. The next day, I received a legal notice. Restraining order, temporary, requested by Madison. Emotional distress. It read, manipulative behavior, unsafe environment. I stared at the paper, stunned. This was not my daughter. This was someone I didn't know. Someone shaped by lies and fear and influence I couldn't compete with. Days passed in a haze. I tried to call Mark, no answer. Tried texting Madison, blocked. I wasn't allowed near the house, near the school, near her. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. Friends said, she's a teenager, she'll come around. But they didn't understand this wasn't rebellion. This was a rewrite of our entire history. Then came the social media post, a picture of Madison with her birth mother, captioned, finally home. The comments were full of hearts, congratulations, people praising their beautiful reunion. I felt like I was going mad. I had wiped this child's vomit, held her through panic attacks, made every birthday special, and now I was a footnote in a caption war. Someone tagged me, I didn't respond. Then the birth mother posted a video, a slick, tear-drained monologue about fighting to reclaim my daughter and overcoming alienation. It went viral in our small town. I saw people from my gym sharing it. No one asked for my side. No one wanted it. One morning, I found a note under my friend's door. No signature. Maybe if you hadn't tried so hard to replace her real mom, none of this would have happened. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I folded the note, burned it in a ceramic bowl, and stared into the flame, wondering if I had imagined it all. That love, that family, that little girl who once whispered, I love you in the dark, because she was gone and I didn't know how to get her back. That weekend, I went for a walk through the old neighborhood trail Madison and I used to frequent when she was small. I remembered her tiny hand in mine, the way she used to collect smooth rocks and name each one. I sat on the same bench we'd once shared and let myself remember. Not everything had been perfect. There were fights, growing pains, misunderstandings. But I had never imagined this. I had never believed the person I loved most could turn me into a villain in her story. That night, I wrote a letter. Not to win her back, not to defend myself, but to let it all out. I poured my heart into every line, the truth of our life together, the joy and pain, the memories only we shared. I sealed it and mailed it to her, even knowing she might never open it. Days passed, no word. And one morning, a package was delivered to my temporary apartment. No return address. Inside was a box filled with everything I had given her: photos, handmade cards, gifts. On top, a note in her handwriting. I don't need reminders of lies. Sat on the floor for hours, surrounded by pieces of our past, each one now twisted by her doubt. That was the day I stopped hoping she'd come back on her own. But even in the midst of all that devastation, a quiet part of me still whispered, if love could build something once, maybe it could rebuild. Someday, somehow, not today, but maybe not never. The days blurred. I stopped counting them. Morning became evening, and meals lost their meaning. I would wake up on the couch in the clothes I wore the night before, unable to recall when I last brushed my hair or even left the apartment. My phone stayed silent, no missed calls, no texts, just a blinking screen that reminded me of the emptiness I couldn't escape. Grief is strange. People think it comes with noise, sobbing, screaming, breaking things. But mine was quiet. It sat on my chest like a sleeping animal, heavy and warm, impossible to shake off. I started avoiding mirrors. I didn't want to see the hollow woman staring back. I thought of Madison constantly. Every song, every commercial, every corner of the city held her imprint. I couldn't go to the grocery store without hearing her laughter in the cereal aisle or imagining her next to me at the bakery counter. I stopped going altogether. I would sit at the edge of my bed, holding one of her old drawings, a stick figure family with me right in the center, labeled Mom. I traced the letters until the ink smudged. I whispered apologies to the air, to her, to myself. My friend Emily visited often, bringing food I never touched. She urged me to talk to a therapist. I nodded but never made the call. What could a stranger possibly say that would stitch me back together? Once I tried writing, a blank document glowed on my laptop screen. I typed a sentence, then deleted it. Again and again, nothing felt right. Words had once been my power, my clarity. Now they betrayed me. One night, I stared at a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter. I opened it, poured a glass, then another, and another. The numbness felt like mercy. Thought about disappearing, just leaving. No note, no goodbye, maybe to some small town by the sea, start over, be nobody, be free. But something stopped me. A memory, faint but persistent. Madison at 5, sick with the flu, clinging to me in the dark. Don't go, Mom, she'd whispered. Stay with me forever. That echo pulled me back, not into joy, but into survival. I started taking short walks at night when no one could see me cry. I wandered through neighborhoods, avoiding streetlights, letting the cold air bite my skin. I needed to feel something, any. One evening, I sat on a park bench as a child rode by on a scooter, her mother jogging behind. The child laughed. The mother called out, "Careful, baby!" And they both disappeared down the path. I felt something rise in me, something like longing, something like anger. It twisted in my gut and made me gasp, not because I envied them, but because I remembered being them. And I missed it. I missed being someone's person. That night, I took a shower, the first in days. I scrubbed my skin raw as if I could wash away the shame, the loss, the rejection. I dried off, dressed, and opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't try to write something profound. I just started with, "My name is Elena. I lost my daughter, and I don't know if I'll ever get her back." It wasn't much, but it was honest. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin. The next morning, I posted that line on an anonymous grief forum. No name, no backstory, just that sentence. Within an hour, replies began to appear. Strangers from around the world said, "Me too. You're not alone. It hurts, but keep breathing." I read every word like they were oxygen, and I cried, not because I was fixed, but because I was seen. That night, I opened the letter Madison had sent back with my old gifts. I read her note again. I don't need reminders of lies. And then I did something that surprised me. I wrote her another letter, not pleading, not defending, just telling her what I remembered. A rainy day picnic under a tree. The time she called me in the middle of a sleepover, crying because she missed home. How she once said I was her safe place. I think I didn't send it. I tucked it into a journal, but writing it felt like stitching a torn seam just a little. And it reminded me that I hadn't vanished. I was still here. Changed, yes. Broken, maybe, but still here. Still Alina. Still somehow a mother. I didn't know what would come next. I still had no plan, no timeline for healing. But for the first time in weeks, I believed that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but fully. Recovery didn't arrive with trumpets. It came in tiny, almost invisible ways. I started by washing my sheets. It felt like a revolution. Then I organized the closet in my friend's guest room where I had been staying. I bought a planner, even if most days only had one or two things written inside. My therapist, whom I finally called, told me healing wasn't a straight line. It's like the tide, she said. Sometimes it rushes forward, sometimes it pulls back, but the water keeps moving. I started going to a community center nearby that hosted writing workshops. The first time I shared a story, my voice shook so badly I could barely read. But when I finished, the group clapped. No one asked if the story was real. They just thanked me for telling it. Little by little, my words returned. I wrote about grief, about identity, about motherhood. I didn't use names, but my heart was in every paragraph. I began a blog under a pseudonym, and to my surprise, it found readers. Other women, other stepmoms, people who had been erased, redefined, rewritten. I remember one comment that said, I thought I was the only one. Thank you. That night, I didn't cry, I smiled. Small, but real. Emily helped me find a studio apartment. It wasn't much, just one window, a tiny kitchen, but it was mine. I painted the walls soft yellow and put up fairy lights. I hung a photo of me and Madison, not because I expected reconciliation, but because it reminded me that love had existed, even if it didn't survive. I still had bad days. I still woke up sometimes thinking I heard her voice, but I also had good days, days when I laughed, when I baked, when I danced alone in my kitchen to old songs I'd almost forgotten. Then one day, a local nonprofit invited me to speak at a parenting seminar. Someone had read my blog. You speak with such clarity, they said. We think your story could help others. I almost declined, but something in me whispered, try. So I stood on a stage, heart pounding, and told a room full of strangers how I had lost a daughter to lies and how I was learning to live with that loss without letting it define me. When I finished, people stood and clapped. A few came up after, tears in their eyes, and shared their own wounds. For the first time in a long time, I felt useful, whole, even. Weeks passed. I kept writing. I volunteered at the nonprofit once a week. I joined a book club. I even went on a date with a gentle, kind-hearted librarian named Daniel, who asked questions without pressing too hard and listened without judgment. I didn't tell him everything, not yet, but I didn't feel the need to hide either. And then on a quiet Tuesday morning, I opened my email to find a message from Madison. Just one sentence. I read your blog. No greeting, no sign off. I stared at the screen for a long time. My heart thudded, my hands trembled. I didn't know what it meant. Forgiveness, curiosity, accusation, but it was something. Crack in the wall. I didn't respond right away. I closed the laptop and went outside. The sky was blue, the air crisp. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, you're still here. Stilena was still somehow enough. That night, I did something brave. I printed out the very first essay I wrote in the workshop, the one about holding a sick child through the night. I folded it neatly, wrote Madison's name on the envelope, and mailed it. I didn't expect an answer. That wasn't the point. The point was that I no longer feared being honest. I no longer apologized for the shape of my heart. At the next seminar, a woman waited until everyone had left before approaching me. She said her daughter had turned against her after reconnecting with an estranged father. I thought I was going crazy, she whispered. But hearing you, it made me believe I'm not broken. In that moment, I understood something deep and quiet. Our pain becomes powerful when it's shared, when it connects us, not isolates us. Maybe I hadn't lost everything. Maybe I had found something else, something just as real. myself. And with that realization, I stood taller. I walked differently, not because I had healed completely, but because I now carried my story with pride, not shame. Months passed after Madison's email. I didn't hear anything else from her, and I tried not to hold my breath. Then one day, I received an invitation to speak at a larger parenting conference in another city. The organizers had followed my blog and wanted me to deliver a keynote about chosen motherhood and emotional resilience. I said yes. The event took place in a spacious auditorium with soft lighting and a packed audience. I wore a navy dress and my grandmother's bracelet for luck. Backstage, I felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but this time, it didn't come with fear. It came with purpose. As I stepped onto the stage and looked out, I froze. There in the third row sat Madison. She wasn't alone, a woman I immediately recognized. Her birth mother sat beside her, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I looked at Madison. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. My pulse pounded. I could have walked off the stage. I could have crumbled, but I began. I used to think motherhood was defined by biology, that blood ties were everything. But I've learned that motherhood is built in the quiet hours, midnight fevers, last minute science projects, birthday cupcakes, heartbreak comfort. I spoke of love that asks for nothing in return, of the pain of losing someone not through death, but through betrayal, and how rebuilding yourself after that is the truest kind of strength. I didn't name names, I didn't attack, but I told the truth. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood. I caught Madison watching me, not angrily, not even tearfully, but quietly, thoughtfully. Afterward, while chatting with attendees, I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there she was. Hi, Madison said. Her voice was small, cautious. Hi, I replied, trying to stay steady. She hesitated, then added, That was really powerful. Thank you. A beat of silence passed. I didn't know, she said softly. I mean, I thought I did. But I didn't. I nodded. We all believe what we need to when we're hurting. She blinked, like that struck something in her. My mom, she's not who I thought she was, Madison admitted. She said a lot of things that now I'm not sure what's true. I know, I said, and it's okay to be unsure. She looked at me, then really looked. Do you hate me? It broke something in me, not in pain, but in release. No, I said, never. She started to cry quietly. I didn't reach for her. I let her feel it. Then she asked, Can I see you again sometime? I smiled gently. Yes, when you're ready. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises, but it was enough. Later, as I left the venue, I saw Madison's birth mother watching us from a distance. Her face was tight, bitter. She turned and walked away without a word. Weeks later, I received a letter from Madison, a real handwritten letter. She wrote about the tension at home, about the way her birth mother kept using guilt to control her, how she'd begun to see the patterns, how she was starting therapy. She didn't ask for me to come back. She didn't say she wanted to live with me. She just said, I want to get to know you again, slowly, carefully, honestly. And that was more than I ever expected. Around the same time, a publisher reached out to me about turning my blog into a book. They said the honesty, the blend of loss and hope was rare and needed. I said yes, not to be famous, but because stories like mine, stories of invisible mothers, of unconditional love and silent pain, they needed a place to live. When the book came out, it became a quiet success. Book clubs read it, podcasts invited me on, strangers emailed me, pouring out their own wounds and gratitude. And all the while, Madison and I met every few weeks for coffee, for walks, for quiet conversations. We never forced anything. We let it grow like something fragile and real. One afternoon, she gave me a drawing, a tree with two roots, one labeled birth, the other love. "You're this one," she said, pointing to the second. I didn't cry, I smiled. That was the moment I knew I hadn't lost. I had lived. I had loved. And I had risen, not for revenge, but for myself. The most remarkable part wasn't the applause or the interviews. It was that slowly, people who once believed the worst about me began to change their tone. A former neighbor messaged me, "I'm sorry I judged you. I didn't know the full story." Even Mark, out of nowhere, emailed, "I watched your talk. I was wrong." I didn't reply to him, not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed his validation. Everything I had tried to prove to others, I now held quietly inside myself. I was more than a misunderstood stepmother. I was a woman who had lost and rebuilt, who had loved without condition, and walked through fire without burning down. And that in itself was the best revenge. Not bitterness, but becoming someone even stronger. It didn't take long for things to unravel. Madison didn't share much about her life with her birth mother, but in the little pieces she did offer, the cracks were obvious. "She asks where I am all the time," Madison told me over coffee one afternoon, but not because she cares. More like she wants to control it. She tells me I owe her for taking me back. Those words chilled me, not out of bitterness, but because I recognize the tactics. Love as a currency, guilt as a leash. Eventually, Madison moved out. She didn't say where at first, only that she needed space. When she did open up, it was to tell me she was living with a friend's family for now. "I just need peace," she said, and she doesn't know how to give it. From mutual acquaintances, I heard the rest. The woman who once painted herself as the tragic, misunderstood mother, the one who had rallied public sympathy through viral posts and polished videos, had started slipping. First, her new relationship ended abruptly. Then the man she'd persuaded to invest in her wellness brand sued her for misrepresentation. Madison didn't go into details, but it was clear that money was involved. So was manipulation. "She used me," Madison said quietly the next time we met. "She got me back just long enough to use me for her image. And then, when I had questions, real questions, she shut down or lashed out. I didn't say I told you so. I never would. That wasn't the point." One night, Madison texted me a screenshot of a message her birth mother had sent, paragraphs of anger, blame, and emotional blackmail. Underneath it, Madison had typed only 3 words: "You were right." But what struck me more than the message was what came after. "I blocked her," Madison said. Weeks passed, then months. Her birth mother tried contacting her through friends, through social media. At one point, she even left voicemails on my business line, pleading, shifting between charm and threat. I didn't respond. Eventually, the messages stopped. The social media presence faded. The internet moved on. But medicine didn't forget, and neither did I, because sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or headlines. It comes in quiet choices, in the rejection of manipulation, in choosing your peace over someone else's chaos. One day, Madison said she asked me to come back to help her. She's lost a lot lately. I asked, "What did you say?" She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I said no. I said I don't owe her anything." Then, softer, And I told her I have someone in my life who actually showed up, who stayed. She meant me. That moment didn't come with trumpets, but to me, it was louder than any vindication. The villain of our story had finally fallen, not by force, but by the weight of her own lies. And I didn't lift a finger. Later that week, I received a letter, handwritten, shaky, unsigned. It was from her. A mixture of regrets, excuses, twisted nostalgia. She wrote about how hard life had become, how everyone had turned against her. There was no apology, only desperation. At the end, she wrote, "You won. Happy now?" I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not because it held power over me, but because I needed to remind myself someday of how far I had come. There would be no reply because I didn't win by fighting back. I won by walking away and never looking back. And in that silence, I found peace, not revenge, just release. Release. Looking back now, I see everything differently. For a long time, I thought the story of my life was about losing Madison, about being betrayed by someone I loved like my own. But I was wrong. The real story was about who I became because of it. I used to define myself by what I gave to others. My worth was wrapped in how needed I was, how much I could endure without breaking. But life doesn't reward quiet sacrifice, it tests it. And sometimes it breaks it open to show us what's underneath. I had to lose the version of motherhood I thought was unshakable to discover a more honest, resilient self. Today, I'm still writing. My book is in its second print. I speak at schools, conferences, women's circles, and every time someone comes up after an event and says, "You told my story," I remember why I kept going. Not to be heard, um, but to help others feel less alone. Madison and I are still rebuilding slowly. There are pauses, hesitations, hard conversations, but there's also laughter, shared meals, the occasional text that says, "Guess what happened today?" She's no longer a child, and I no longer try to parent her in the old ways. I just show up, honestly. Love, I've learned, isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's just being there when it matters. To anyone who has ever been erased, misunderstood, or cast aside for loving deeply, I want you to know this. Your love was never wasted. Your presence mattered, even if the world didn't clap for it. I once feared I'd never matter again, that my story had ended the day I was asked to leave my home. But here I am, standing in my own apartment, plants thriving on the windowsill, laughter echoing in my walls, stories blossoming on my screen. I am not who I was, and I wouldn't want to be. I am Helena, a writer, a woman, a mother, not by blood, but by choice. And that's not more than enough. Sometimes I still hear echoes of the past, a laugh that sounds like hers when she was 10, the rustle of a page turning during bedtime stories, the creak of the stairs she used to run down each morning. They don't haunt me anymore. They remind me that I loved well. I gave all I could. And maybe that's what being a mother is, not a title, not a role. It's a choice you make every day, even when the world tries to tell you that you don't belong. Madison once asked me if I regretted it. Would you do it all over again, knowing how it ended? I looked at her and said, yes, 1,000 times yes. Because love isn't love unless it's given freely, not for outcomes, not for loyalty, but because your heart insists on it. And if I had to go through every ache, every silence, every cruel word again, just to hold the good moments one more time, to hear her call me mom just once more, I would. That's the kind of mother I am. That's the kind of woman I've become. Because in the end, love isn't measured by how it ends, but by how truly it was given. And I gave it truly.